Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the TIM Showcase session for the best dissertation finalists. This year we have 5 wonderful dissertations and finalists, 4 of whom are here with us today to present, and then we have 1 finalist who couldn't be here at AOM, so I have a video recording of his presentation. So I'm going to request each of the 4 finalists who are here to come up on stage, and then each of them will present their work for about 10 minutes. If you have questions, please hold them towards the end. We'll have about a 10-15 minute time period towards the end of the session. Audra Wormal from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, PhD from University of Maryland. Please come on, Audra. Jung Kwon, PhD from University of Texas, Dallas, who's a faculty at University of Denver. Jung-Kyu Soo, PhD from Duke University, faculty at New York University. And actually a best dissertation winner, Ying Li, PhD from University of Illinois. She's now at Instituto de Madrid. Thank you. Audra, do you want to start us off?
Hello, everyone. I am Audra Wormald. I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I'm very honored and excited to be able to present today with this great group. My dissertation is called Money Matters: The Pioneering of Platforms Under Institutional Uncertainty in the Global Mobile Money Industry. I completed my dissertation at the University of Maryland under the supervision of Rashmi Agrawal and Sergey Brzezinski. So I want to start my talk by taking us back in time to 1995. At this point, worldwide, there were 2.3 billion individuals who were considered unbanked. These are individuals who do not have access to formal financial institutions like bank branches or ATMs. And as you can see from this chart here, this varies widely depending on what part of the world you're in. So in sub-Saharan Africa, about 80% of the population was considered unbanked. And it's within this context that mobile money emerges as a novel solution that will help improve financial inclusion. Now, the types of mobile money platforms I'm studying look a little different than, say, Venmo, PayPal, or Apple Pay that you and I might be more familiar with. So just to give you a quick recap of what this looks like, an individual would first take cash to her local mobile money agent's kiosk. That agent then adds that cash into her mobile money account, and it can be accessed using a very basic phone. And then she can transfer her money from her account to another person's account who uses the same mobile money platform. So by 2021, there are 1.35 billion registered mobile money accounts globally. And from this chart here, this plots the number of mobile money platforms worldwide. So you can see over time how this industry has emerged and takes off and has really provided another source of financial access for a number of individuals. So mobile money represents a very unique context in which to study this question of how new firms and industries can emerge as a solution to some of these grand challenges that we face. So my dissertation is based in this phenomenon of the mobile money emergence. I hand-collected a longitudinal database of the mobile money industry to examine some understudied aspects of industry emergence. So my first study looks at how pioneering firms went about establishing digital platform ecosystems around these mobile money platforms. And then the second study looks at how variation in market supporting institutions across different countries shaped industry emergence. So the first study, Pioneering Digital Platform Ecosystems, you can now find this published in SMJ with my co-authors Sonali Shah, Sergey Brzezinski, and Rashmi Agrawal. What we know about from the literature on industry emergence is during this time of incubation and the nascent phase, lots and lots of uncertainty. And so the pioneers of these industries, they faced a lot of high risks, but also high rewards. And those who are able to survive enjoy superior performance. Much of what we know about industry emergence are based on more traditional industrial or manufacturing types of contexts. But nowadays, we see lots of new firms coming out that are digital platforms. And so digital platforms are technological systems whereby I'm going to talk about 2 salient features today. One are that complementary capabilities are provided by an ecosystem of firms. Secondly, the importance of network effects in driving dominance. So in the mobile money context, the two key complementary capabilities that we look at are mobile networks and financial transactions enabling software. And so pioneering firms at this time needed to figure out, should they integrate these capabilities within or across firm boundaries? Now, turning to network effects, the revolutionary potential of mobile money was to be able to access the platform and financial services anywhere at any time somebody had a mobile device, as opposed to having to go to a physical bank branch. And so the second platform choice these pioneers are making is, how do we attract enough end users to be able to capture these different kinds of network effects? And so it's these two salient features that may increase some of the uncertainty that's happening in this early phase of the industry, and so insights that we know from traditional settings merit some re-examination. So this study really looks at what's the relationship between pioneering founding characteristics of the firms, how does this relate to the key platform choices that they're making, and then in turn, how do these choices shape the implementation challenges they face as they launch these platforms, and ultimately performance outcomes at the firm level and the platform level. So this study uses a two-part inductive approach relying on both quantitative and qualitative archival data. And the main takeaway here is that we find, of the census of pioneering firms, there are these two dominant combinations related to these two platform choices. And we find that in contrast to received wisdom, firms are actually equally likely to engage in external and internal integration of these complementary capabilities, and diversifying entrants were less likely to internally integrate than startups. So then we wanted to understand, why is that? And our qualitative data reveals that these platform choices are predicated on motives that extend beyond profits. Motives really created this alignment between pioneering firms and their partners that were really important for them to be able to address path-dependent implementation challenges as they were experimenting and navigating this nascent industry uncertainty. Moving into the second study, this study was really motivated by looking at mobile money across Africa and saying, well, why do some countries have lots of platform entry and some countries have very little or even no entry? And thinking about how the formal institutions might vary across these contexts. So we know as an industry is emerging, it moves through these different industry stages. There's different knowledge bases that need to be built on these different dimensions, so focusing in on this institution's dimension of variation. Much of the empirical work from industry evolution studies tend to focus on single industry and single country contexts, and so to date has been unable to examine these variations across countries. Additionally, much of this empirical work is based on developed country contexts, where formal market-supporting institutions like protected property rights, robust financial and judicial systems are in place. This we know is very different from developing countries, where characterized by institutional voids. So this study is arguing that theoretically we just need a better understanding of how these different market institutions can influence industry emergence. So this paper takes an abductive approach, triangulating across different kinds of data in order to make inferences to the best explanation. Mobile money is an industry that's at the convergence of telecommunications and financial services. Separately, these are two of the most highly regulated industries across the world, and when you mash them up together, you get all sorts of regulatory concerns. So even ex-ante regulators are scrutinizing what mobile money is going to look like. How are we going to think about regulating it? So lots of regulatory uncertainty, and different countries are taking different perspectives on this. So in this study, I look at two different regulatory approaches to mobile money. And in Africa, 20 countries took what I call the entry-first approach. So they allowed platforms and firms to come in and launch their mobile money platforms before setting any kinds of specific mobile money regulations, and down the road, they developed these regulations. Other countries took what I'm calling the regulations-first approach, where first they enacted mobile money-specific regulations, and only after these regulations were in place did they allow firms to enter. So looking at the implications of those choices, I find that industry emergence was shaped by these regulatory approaches, and that these approaches are actually consistent with some colonial legacies. So former British colonies tended to take an entry-first approach. This is consistent with the British common law tradition, where much of the legal basis is based on precedents. And in contrast, former French colonies tended to take a regulations-first approach, consistent with a civil law legal tradition that emphasizes a lot of codification. And so what I find is that former British colonies experienced faster time to entry compared to non-British colonies, and that entry was systematically later in regulations-first countries. And so this had some implications for social welfare in that regulations-first countries continued to have lower levels of user adoption of these platforms compared to individuals in these entry-first countries. So an indication here of delaying some of these benefits of financial inclusion for the unbanked population. So I'll just wrap up by saying, together these studies underscore the importance of uncertainty reduction and experimentation for innovative solutions to provide sustained solutions to thorny societal problems. This is particularly salient in developing country contexts where institutions may be missing or inadequate, but can emerge and grow as an industry comes about. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Jung-hyun Kwon. I go by Jung. I'm an assistant professor of management at the University of Denver. Before starting my talk, I would like to greatly appreciate the organizer, RAM, and then the other TIM scholars who served as a reviewer for this amazing showcase session. So as entitled, my dissertation is about, I studied like a strategic management of intellectual property right and then technology-based entrepreneurship. So in 1990s, investment in intangible asset outweighed the investment in the tangible asset. So according to the USPTO in 2019, there were 127 IP-intensive industry account for 41% of US GDP and then 44% of the US employment. So in my dissertation, I asked, how do firms strategically create and capture economic value from innovation investment? I break down these questions into three smaller questions in my dissertation. So in a nutshell, my dissertation intersects innovation strategy, entrepreneurial innovation, and then tech management. So there are three different essays about resource acquisition strategy, and second one is digitization, and then third one is ex-post IP management. So I triangulated these research questions in my dissertation. The triangulation includes big data analysis. Each essay includes more than 2 million big data analysis, and then complemented by the informal interviews. And then I participate in the theoretical discussions and at the major conferences in our field. And I will highlight some of the key findings. So first essay, the title itself is a research question. So when do firms trade and buy and sell patents? So first one, key finding indicate that firms trade patent when the tech relativity of a patent is greater between a potential buyer and an original assignee, which is a current patent holding company. However, the inter-firm patent trade become weaker when the potential buyer and assignee are situated in the same industry or product market, and then also the assignee has a high tech capability. So do patent change hand? My short answer is yes, which is salient in the drug and medical device industry, which is highest 16%. And then extrapolating two factors. So there were 378,000 US patent inactive only in 2018, and then one typical US patent has monetary value of the $38,000 US dollars. So US patent market would amount to the 14 billion US dollar only in 2018. So why? My short answer to why do firms buy and sell patents would be somewhat related to offense and then defense simultaneously. Companies are trading patent, pursuing offense and defense. Offense would be closely associated with tech commercialization, and then defense would be closely associated with mitigating litigation risk, as well as protecting their current revenue stream. So my data set speaks for itself. So I ranked the top 10 seller and buyer in the biopharma industry over the 3 decades. Based on the pioneering role of the Pfizer during the pandemic, Pfizer served as a seller and buyer in the biopharma market here. And multiple contributions emerge. Out of those, I would like to highlight the patent trade not only contribute value exploitation, but also the value creation, because providing access to the higher quality, but lower priced technical solution to the innovation market. So second paper is about digitization. Here, I ask, how do sudden changes in search cost caused by the digitization affect and reshape the startup innovation? So key findings, digitization actually increased innovation quantity without compromising the quality. The most important stuff was second point, the digitization stimulated invention cross-fertilization across the different life science domains. Basically, I found that 120% greater increase in the invention cross-fertilization after the digitization. And then third one, it helped expand the startup invention breadth beyond the existing tech portfolio. And then interestingly, innovation diffusion was facilitated, but only when invention attracted early attention in the scientific community. So top three figures shows the dynamics of the startup innovation, and then bottom three shows like innovation diffusion. In a nutshell, when the startup situated in a remote area and then less economically privileged, they benefited more from the digitization of the patent record. So I conducted a natural experiment by exploiting sudden exogenous shock, which was the introduction of a Google patent, which was on the December 13, 2006. I compared the pre and post. So multiple contribution, but this study show how digitization reshaped prolificacy, nature, and impact of entrepreneurial innovation. And then secondly, this study shows and measured actually empirically and analyzed the search cost in the paper. Third one is regarding the rear option management. So here I ask, how do firms manage rear options by using the patent renewers? Our iPhone could have looked like this based on the granted patent back in 1985. But interestingly, surprisingly, more than 55% of the US patents are abandoned, cannot enjoy full lifespan, even among the tech giant, including the IBM, Samsung, or Apple. So in times of economic crisis, such abandonments grow. So based on my informal interview, IBM encouraged their scientists, engineers, researchers patent most of their idea. Annually, they receive 9,000. They used to be top, but until the 2021, but they really employ a lot of real option logic. So their abandonment is over than 55%. So, however, by contrast, second biggest recipient, Samsung, so became the top as of the last year. Abandonment rate remains less than 20%. So they are gatekeeping patent filing by the internal committee composed of the inventor, expert, engineer, lawyer. And then they are giving up on a patent right over the patent lifespan. So I found that firms extend rear option by renewing the patent characterized by the greater tech opportunity and then high tech fragmentation. And they abandon rear options by not renewing patent characterized by the fast cycle time and then novel inventions. Interestingly, novel inventions perceived to have a higher upside potential initially, but as time goes by, their value and utility diverged, and then at the timing of renewal, they are abandoned. So implications. So thus far, I thought, and then we thought, companies pursue patent to protect their idea or inventions, or at least to reduce product market competition. However, companies also can buy idle IP rights, intellectual property right, in the innovation market. So at the same time, giving a new life to the technology not in use. So I believe that an unacquired patent could serve as a missing puzzle piece, at the same time giving a new life and meaning to the technology currently less efficiently used in the market. And then strategic use of the IP right, intellectual property right, would help new ventures and then the new ventures and startups in kind of like swimming with the sharks a little more safely and then at the same time fostering the science and technology progress, and ultimately social well-being. So closing remark would be, I believe that intellectual property right serve as the new currency of the capitalism without capital in post-information age. So I wish that by conducting meaningful research, we collectively pursue our calling for truth and then make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone for gracing us with your presence. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank my dissertation advisors, Ashishura Sharon Belenzon, Wesley Cohen, Dan Gross, and David Robinson, and especially an advisor that shall remain unnamed, who impressed upon me that these early stage career awards mean nothing and you should work 3 times as hard. As you know, I did my PhD at Duke University, and I've just started as a faculty at NYU. Let's dive straight into it. I've been always really interested in how firms manage scientific knowledge, because science really forms the bedrock of modern innovation. And to really give you a historical survey of how innovation has been managed over the long period, the first chapter of my dissertation really goes back in time and tries to understand, documents a fundamental shift that has happened in the way firms manage knowledge, whereby traditionally breakthrough products like the nylon were really based on inventions that were done at the same firm, DuPont, and the inventions themselves were based on the science that was produced at the same company in a central research laboratory inside the same company. In other words, firms were internalizing the entire supply chain of innovation, starting from science to invention to innovation. But starting with around the 1980s, firms really started to outsource this fundamental research function to outsiders. So if you look at NSF data, you find that although R&D, as we show in the bar graph, has climbed steadily, the share of research out of research and development has actually gone down steadily from about 32% peak in 1986 to about 23% in 2012. And firms, instead of doing this research, have been trying to buy this research from universities and startups. And the markets for technologies that support this activity has really grown by at least 12 times, if you believe the Patent Trademarks Office assignment data set that shows the number of traded patents as a share of total patents in force. So the new innovation ecosystem that we are living with these days is characterized by a division of innovative labor, whereby the scientific discoveries are done by universities, by researchers like Drew Weissman and Kathleen Carrico, and the inventions using these scientific discoveries are done at the VC-backed startups such as Moderna. And the innovations that really scale and develop this activity are done by incumbents. In other words, it's not DuPont, 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 it's different actors that are changing hands. Now, having sort of documented this fundamental shift, I ask in the subsequent chapters of the dissertation 2 following questions. First, why has this fragmentation occurred? And for the interest of time, I won't go into the second chapter, but we'll focus on the third chapter. The second question is, now that the fragmentation has occurred, how will that affect the direction of innovation? And that's where I go into my job market paper. So diving straight into the first question, why has the decline of corporate science happened? I go back in time to really ask the basic question, again, of why firms invest in research in the first place. And this rise of corporate science, if you will, in America, the bulk of it, anyways, happened between the 2 world wars in the 1920s and 30s, in industries such as petrochemicals and in the electrical industries by firms such as GE, AT&T, and DuPont. And based on those histories, the story goes basically our theory goes in 3 legs. Firms invested in science first because there were a lot of scientific opportunities during this time. And the patent data really speaks for itself. This is data from Kelly's AER. Using patent textual simulators, you really find a spike during the 20s and 30s where chemicals and electricity as a scientific discipline really had a lot to offer in terms of low-hanging fruits. Secondly, some American firms like GE and AT&T came close to the technological frontier where things like trial and error really were starting to fail them. So GE's main product, incandescent light bulbs, had a problem of bulb blackening. And they were trying all sorts of trial and errors until they hired a Nobel laureate, Irving Langmuir, from Germany to solve the problem. And he made a lot of basic sort of surface chemistry discoveries to solve that problem. And as you can see from that example of Irving Langmuir, American universities at this time were quite inadequate relative to the global frontier, which at this point in time, in the 20s and 30s, was still playing catch up to the global frontier in Europe. So if you watch the Oppenheimer film, you'll know that J. Robert Oppenheimer did his PhD at the University of Göttingen, as did Irving Langmuir. So the American supremacy, if you will, in university knowledge only occurs after the Second World War. And our theory is that because of this marriage of three factors, leading companies that were at the technological frontier stood to gain a lot if they invested internally in research activities. So to support these theories, we assemble a very comprehensive firm panel from 1926 and 1940, and do indeed find the technological leaders invest in science. How do we measure technological leadership? In many ways, but the featured one looks at whether you have the very first patent in a new patent class. And such leaders have about 26 times more publications in peer-reviewed scientific journals. They employ about 14 times more lab personnel in their central laboratories, and employ about 11 times more star scientists. And what's really interesting is that this leader-laggard gap is really pronounced for fields where American universities were weak. So here, the American scientific gap to Europe is measured by whether your field cites European science a lot. So in the 90 percentile region, you see firms like AT&T that rely on physics or mathematics, where the reliance on German science is very high. In the 10 percentile, you see disciplines like food sciences, medicine, or geology. And you see that the leader premium, if you will, in publishing is about 6 times larger for firms that are operating in these gapped, void areas. The reason I find this result really interesting and why it contributes to the initial question is that the decline of corporate science that we see, since the 1980s could actually be because of, in spite of the continued rise of the research university sector, which is basically giving out free knowledge to all firms, which may possibly be dampening the internal incentive to invest in science. So on to the second question. Now that we have this fragmented innovation ecosystem, what will it do to the direction of innovation? And many people that are enamored by the stories of storied startups sort of hail startups as the commercializers of new innovation. But I would argue that our understanding of this is actually quite incomplete. On the one hand, some theories say that startups are inherently better at commercializing new science. So if you are Larry Page, it's much easier to commercialize a PageRank algorithm because you came up with it yourself. Cutting-edge science oftentimes has a lot of tacitness associated with it, so it's difficult to codify and to transfer that. But the problem with that, of course, is that for every open AI that you find, you also find an NVIDIA, an incumbent firm that is just as good at absorbing new knowledge. On the other hand, you have explanations that say startups aren't just better, they just choose different kinds of problems to focus on. And a dominant strand in this school of thought says that startups are backed by venture capitalists that have higher risk preferences, so they're just taking riskier bets. But it's also possible that a risk-neutral startup still focuses on a novel problem, because the entry costs that they need to pay as they enter the downstream market in the form of new manufacturing, sales, and distribution channels pushes them to be more disciplined about the problems that they face, though they're going to try to swing for the fences a lot more. Teasing these three explanations apart is really difficult because firms do differ in their ex-ante endowments and their preferences. So in this context, I focus on how the American laser industry responded to an influx of Soviet laser science after the end of the Cold War. Concretely, I use a bibliography of about 4,100 lasers globally since 1960 to 2000 to figure out which laser types the Soviet Union was superior in. I link them to pre-entry patenting activities based on citations to Soviet lasers as well as the chemical compounds that are listed in the bibliography. And finally, I scrape a industry buyer's guide that has lasing attributes that lets me figure out the novelty of these products as well as their linkage, again, back to the Soviet Union. 4 findings very quickly. The first is that startup products are more novel. So yes to the first question. So far, by process of elimination, I cannot rule out any of the 3 explanations. However, if you look at how firms are patenting before they're entering, it looks like that startups and incumbent firms actually do not differ significantly in their novelty. They also don't differ too much in their citations to Soviet science. And therefore, it doesn't seem like startups simply have geniuses working for them. Now that we've ruled that out, I look at the 3rd and 4th findings, which says that conditional upon patenting, startups are much less likely, about half as likely to enter the product market, and conditional upon entering the product market are about 60% more likely to survive. They're less likely to enter and less likely to exit, which is the opposite of what you would find if these were simply wild spraying and praying type of risk-loving startups. So by process of elimination, I deduce that all 4 patterns are actually consistent with startups being more disciplined, selective about the markets they're entering, and they choose to enter novel products because they need to overcome entry costs. So as a takeaway, quickly, 3 things. The innovation ecosystem has fragmented. Why? It could be that the abundance of public science that we have these days could be dampening research incentives. Thirdly, how does that matter for the direction of innovation? Startups are awesome, but not because they're geniuses. They focus on different kinds of problems. Thank you so much.
Okay, next we'll hear from Manav.
My name is Manav Raj, and I'm an assistant professor at the management department at Wharton. While I would have loved to have joined you in person in Boston, I am missing AOM this year for my honeymoon. I want to thank the Tim Dissertation Award Committee for providing me with the opportunity to still share my dissertation work with you all today. It's an honor to be selected alongside these other great scholars. The research question that motivates my dissertation is, what are the competitive implications of platforms and digital markets for the firms competing upon them? My dissertation is structured into 3 chapters, and what I'm going to do today is talk through each of these chapters at a really high level, just highlighting what I view as the key takeaways of each project. With that, I'll dive into the first project, which is titled Friends in High Places and studies interprovider spillovers on digital platform markets. The research question underlying this study is, when are interprovider demand spillovers larger or smaller on a digital platform? We know that interprovider relationships on digital platforms can be simultaneously competitive and complementary. The presence of indirect network effects and the low cost of search on digital platforms can facilitate an environment that is conducive to demand spillovers across providers. As whether relationships are competitive or complementary depends on this net balance between positive demand spillovers and the negative effects of substitution, understanding the factors driving the size of these demand spillovers is very important. In this research, what I'm going to do is look at the role of provider characteristics in shaping how demand spillovers are created and experienced following pure activity on a digital platform. I'll be studying this question in the context of the Spotify digital music streaming platform. Spotify is a great study for studying heterogeneity in demand spillovers because it is a setting that is highly conducive to demand spillovers. So I'm able to document a lot of them and explore variation in what I see. In this project, what I'm basically going to do is examine how provider performance changes in response to peer activity. Specifically, I'll be looking at changes in provider performance in response to related artist album release. As a high-level summary of my results, what I see is that on average, related artist album release increases provider performance, both in terms of unique listeners as well as in terms of streaming popularity. However, I document a lot of heterogeneity in this effect depending on focal provider and peer characteristics. So just to walk you through this heat map, what we're seeing here is that album launch by a low popularity related artist does not generate large enough spillovers to overcome substitution. So it's really when high popularity star peers act that they are attracting enough consumption to the market to overcome the negative effects of substitution. And if we look at the effects by focal provider popularity, what we see is that less popular focal providers benefit a lot more from demand spillovers because they benefit more from consumer learning as a result of this increased attention or exposure. Taken together, I think this provides us with a more nuanced idea of how spillovers manifest on a digital platform. To summarize what I view as my key contributions, I'm integrating literature on on-platform demand spillovers with a literature on industry agglomeration that talks about heterogeneity in demand spillovers experience in off-platform settings. I conduct a number of mechanism tests that help us understand how these effects manifest in our setting and thus help us understand what makes platforms unique relative to offline markets. And I'm adding to our understanding of competition and particularly the competitive versus complementary balance between providers on digital platforms. Next, I'll move on to talking about the second chapter of my dissertation. This project is titled When Delivery Comes to Town, Digital Distribution Platform Penetration and Establishment Exit. This is a co-authored project with JP Eggers. And the context of this project and the way I want us to start thinking about it is through food delivery. You guys are probably all familiar with apps that look like this, these kinds of platforms that connect consumers with existing restaurants and existing establishments that are out there. What we believe is that this is not a specific trend to restaurants. We're increasingly seeing what we're going to call digital distribution platforms, which are platforms that connect us with existing brick and mortar incumbents across industries. And we believe that these kinds of platforms are understudied. We don't quite know what they mean for the firms that are forced to compete with them. So the research question that motivates this study is how do digital distribution platforms affect industry incumbents, and specifically who benefits or is harmed more? What we'll be doing is developing hypotheses regarding the heterogeneous effects of digital distribution platforms and testing these hypotheses in a study of the US restaurant industry. To provide you with a really high-level view of our theoretical framework, we're going to suggest that digital distribution platform emergence and growth will affect the performance of incumbents in 3 different ways. 1, it changes the nature of consumer search and changes how consumers find and evaluate offerings. 2, it causes a revaluation of strategic assets as firms have to rethink how they create value within the industry. And 3, the introduction of an intermediary changes how value is shared amongst actors within the value chain. So what we're going to do is we're going to link each one of these steps in the process to measurable constructs in our empirical setting to validate this theoretical framework. Our empirical setting is going to be restaurants in the US. Our data consists of the population of restaurants in the United States using data from Nets. We will look at the relationship between delivery platform penetration as measured through consumer adoption and restaurant exit. And then we will look at how it differs across, again, a number of setting-specific variables that connect to the theoretical constructs that we're interested in studying in this research. To provide you first with a high-level summary of what we're seeing at the geographic level, we find that platform penetration has no relationship with restaurant entry rates, a positive relationship with restaurant exit rates, and thus is potentially problematic for business dynamism. So, whether we look at it at the locality level or if we look at it at the restaurant level, we see evidence that in this setting, delivery platform penetration seems to lead to an increase in restaurant exit. When we start looking at the heterogeneous effects, we largely find support for our predictions. The effect of digital distribution platforms are less detrimental for older restaurants that are more familiar to consumers and restaurants operating in more niche market segments. So there's a change in consumer search there. It is less detrimental for restaurants that have invested less in physical real estate, as those assets are less important as the way in which value is created changes. And it is less detrimental for restaurants that have more financial resources and can withstand the introduction of this additional intermediary. As we think through our contributions, we think, one, that we're highlighting how different kinds of platforms may have different implications for firms in the market, for incumbents. If we're thinking about peer-to-peer platforms, they bring in a flood of new entrants. But here, what we're saying with digital distribution platforms is we may actually see consolidation around options that are most familiar to consumers. We're adding to a body of work, studying how digital platforms affect industry incumbents, and we're shedding light on the characteristics and resources that are most valuable in these newly created platform ecosystems. Finally, moving on to the third chapter, this project is titled COVID-19 and Digital Resilience. It is co-authored with Arun Sundararajan and Callum Mew. In this project, what we're going to be asking is what were the roles of digital platforms during the pandemic? So we all probably know with the shelter-in-place orders, with the shutdowns that are going on, delivery services saw a huge surge in business. They were vital for many restaurants, particularly, and that is the setting that we'll be studying. We'll be investigating this increase in activity on these delivery platforms in the context of the Uber Eats platform and considering changes in both demand and supply side behavior and how they interact with each other. And hopefully we'll be able to examine some heterogeneity in the effect based on restaurant locality characteristics that help us generate some sort of theory in understanding how digital platforms are helpful for establishments. Our data and empirical setting comes from the Uber Eats delivery platform. We have data from 5 cities from Uber Eats. These samples are small and medium businesses as defined by Uber. What we'll be doing is tracking changes in supply and demand in the platform pre and post the imposition of shelter-in-place guidance. We'll be looking right in those first few months pre and post the pandemic, and our main dependent measure is going to be looking at the count of orders. What we see, again, just highlighting a few of our results, is that there's perhaps unsurprisingly, a positive effect of this post-period shock on cities. So across cities, we see that following the imposition of shelter-in-place guidance, there's far more activity on the platform. And that restaurants that stay on the platform generally increase the number of orders they do. However, what we think is really interesting is that it does appear that supply side factors play a role too. So what this chart is showing is the post effect as a function of the number of competing restaurants that you have that are open. So we see as competition increases, as more of your competitors are open, the post effect shrinks. So it's an interesting interplay because obviously the platform wants more restaurants open, but if you are a restaurant on the platform, you would love to see less competition. Through this project, our findings, we think, provide insight into how platforms can be a source of resilience. We think by exploring the moderating effect of competition on performance on digital platforms, we're highlighting this interesting tension between what may be best for the platform and what may be best for the complementers may not always align. So through this dissertation, what I've convinced you of is that I'm building our understanding of the balance between competitive and complementary dynamics across providers. I'm helping us understand under what conditions industry actors are best able to capture value from digital platforms, and also helping us understand what makes platforms unique relative to other kinds of market settings. Moving forward, I am continuing to develop these projects. All of them are in slightly different shape than what I just presented since it's been about a year. If you're interested in learning more, please do reach out to me. I'm happy to share the latest versions of all these working papers. And I'm hoping to more broadly build a research program that sits at the intersection of technological change and competitive strategy. Before I wrap up, I want to take a moment to thank my committee, my co-chairs, Deepak Hegde and Rob Siemens, as well as JP Eggers and Arun Sundararajan. I am very, very lucky that I had a phenomenal team of mentors and co-authors in my corner. I wouldn't be where I am right now without their support, and I'm very, very grateful to have had them as advisors. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you again to the TIM Dissertation Committee for giving me this opportunity to share my work. I hope to hear from some of you. If you're interested, please do reach out.
Good afternoon. Thanks again to the TIM division for giving me this great opportunity to share my dissertation work. First of all, I would like to thank my amazing dissertation committee because without them, I cannot be here today. And my advisor, Olga Kisina, is in the audience. Olga, thank you for everything you've done for me. I also have important mentors, Joe Mahoney, and my peers and my colleagues at UC3M. Thank you very much for coming to support. So this dissertation started with observation because many major shifts in industry evolution are often triggered by technological innovations. For example, in the over 100-century-long history in the movie theater industry, many technological innovations were the reason that this industry moved into different evolutionary stages. But what I'm interested in is managers, entrepreneurs, or consumers in different geographic communities may hold different interpretations of the same technological innovation. Well, we all know that movies used to be silent, but when the sound transition came in 1927, some communities think it was a great innovation because finally movies learned to talk. But other communities think this is not a good innovation in some way because, especially for communities with a lot of non-English speaking immigrants and even illiterate people, English dialogue movies would be a hurdle for them to enjoy movies anymore. So different communities really can hold very different interpretations about the same technological innovation. So the overarching research question I wanted to ask in the dissertation is, what role do local communities play in shaping technology-propelled industry evolution dynamics? To do this, I situated the industry in the American movie theater industry from its very inception in 1896 to the COVID pandemic. I have 3 quantitative chapters and a qualitative chapter. In the interest of time, today we'll focus on chapter 1, which is recently accepted for publication at AMJ. So I collected data from both archival sources and primary sources. In the end, I have reached data not only at the theater level, but also at different geographical scales. So chapter 1, how provisional spaces for movie projection technology shaped the emergence of movie theaters in Chicago communities from 1896 to 1927. So when my advisor and co-author, Olga, when we started this project, we noticed a very interesting phenomena in this industry because although the enabling technology for the industry, which is the movie theater, movie projection technology, became commercially available in 1896, the first movie theater in the US did not emerge until 10 years later. So there is a prolonged pre-birth period. And moreover, communities, different geographic communities, have different emerging timing and forms of movie theaters when they host their first movie theater. So we all know what a movie theater looks like nowadays, but back in the history, there were at least 2 forms of movie theaters. One is lowbrow, the other is highbrow. Specifically, the lowbrow was called nickel loading, which means you just spend 1 nickel to watch a movie in oding, which means theater in Greek. So our question for this project is, how does the first organization of a new kind come into being? So what we found is this important role of provisional spaces, because before movie theaters came into being, actually people were able to watch movies just in the existing organizations in the local communities, such as an opera house, such as a dime museum. And moreover, these provisional spaces can be categorized into 2 groups. Some of them were highbrow, some of them were lowbrow. By the way, dime museum was not really a museum. It was a place you pay a dime to watch a round of freak shows, like a woman with 2 heads. So those sort of places. So using history, event history analysis on the population of movie showing venues in 75 Chicago communities, we found that first, communities with a higher cumulative number of provisional spaces since the availability of the movie projection technology, those communities host their first movie theaters sooner than the other communities. Furthermore, the types of provisional spaces matter because if a community has a higher number of lowbrow provisional spaces, then the audiences and actors in that local community tend to attach a lowbrow meaning to this technology. And therefore, when there is a first movie theater being founded in this local community, it tends to be a lowbrow form, a movie theater. So through this paper, we wanted to make 3 contributions. The first and most important one is to the organizational form emergence literature, because in contrast with the assumption in the existing literature, which usually depicts the first organization as a result of surprise or randomness or a heroic achievement, we show that when we take into consideration the role of provisional spaces, we can actually predict the timing and location, even the form of the first organization of a new kind. Also, if you're interested, please take a look at the table 1 in the paper where we summarize all the space-related concepts in the management literature, and we showed that how our concept of provisional spaces complements with existing space and place concepts. And finally, we have a contribution to the innovation and entrepreneurship literature, because we know that technology can trigger entrepreneurial opportunities, but the perception of the opportunity and the interpretation of the opportunity could be very much shaped by how the local communities were exposed to this innovation in the first place. So that's chapter 1. In chapter 2, which is a paper published in a special issue in Strategic Organization, I investigate this phenomenon called a community namesake, defined by an organization named after the local community. My argument is that during industry emergence, when it's hard to collect competitive intensity information in a local market, when the potential entrepreneurs examined the local community and found the presence of a community namesake, they might be intimidated. They don't want to enter the local market anymore because they think the local community really reward the namesake who shows a lot of local commitment. So they want to give this community organization a lot of extra resources. So that could make the community namesake a strong competitor. So the finding is that during industry emergence, when there is a community namesake founded, the entry rates in the local market will decrease. In chapter 3, together with my co-authors Samira Reis and Olga Kisina, we investigate the relatedness between two different industries, which was the emerging television broadcasting industry and the existing movie theater industry in the 1940s to 1960s. Well, we all read some history that says the TV programming industry was the reason that the movie theater industry declined. But how, right? Because if you really compare the technology, the quality of the cultural products between the two industries, actually TV programming industry was kind of inferior to the movie theater industry, at least when it was initially emerging. So what we're proposing in this paper is two social cultural mechanisms. One is called cultural embeddedness, and the other is called social silence. Well, cultural embeddedness means the emerging industry adopts the cultural elements that already exist in the existing industry. So, for example, some TV shows, they use the movie genres like drama, comedy, or thriller, but there's also a bunch of other types of TV shows that use the non-movie related genres, like a talk show, variety show, or a cooking show. So what we found is that only the TV shows that use the movie genres were the driver of the decline of the movie theater industry. And moreover, in different geographic communities, their socio-demographic characteristics make the local communities had a different level of perception of the substitutability between these two industries. For example, in highly educated communities, people will see the genre overlap between these two industries, but they can still feel that the two cultural products are very different in many ways. So the impact of cultural embeddedness of the TV programming industry on the decline of the movie theater industry is less salient in highly educated local communities. So finally, I have a qualitative chapter in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was really a project near and dear to my heart. 2 months before the breakout of the COVID pandemic, in January 2020, I was in the field talking to the art house movie theater professionals, and they all told me how much they hated streaming, how they would never do anything related to streaming, but look at what happened. 2 months after that, in 1 week, 99% of the art house movie theaters were forced to stream on their websites because they had to shut down. So I got super curious. I asked them, why are you making this change? Do you think this is a violation of your commitment, of your organizational identity? Well, what they told me is that, technology like streaming is essentially a technology. Before pandemic, including them, everybody just associate streaming with Netflix, but there can be multiple ways of using this technology. What art house movie theaters did was that they used the streaming in a way that is very consistent with their values. So in contrast with Netflix, who threw thousands of movies there, who use algorithms to predict customer preferences, art house movie theaters only stream 4 movies at most on their website. And instead of just throwing the links for people to stream the movie, actually the art house movie theaters did tons of work inviting filmmakers, community leaders to talk about the important social issues embodied in the films and give people a sense of community even though they were doing this virtually. So the lesson is that the technology is the same, but depending on what the organizations believe in, what they value, they could use this technology in a way that is really consistent with their commitment. So overall, my dissertation proposes this cultural geography perspective of industry evolution. I show that local communities play an important role in shaping how people interpret the social cultural meanings of a technological innovation, leading to localized industry evolutionary dynamics. With that, thank you again. I'm really honored to be here.
Great set of presentations. We have about 5 minutes for questions, comments. Joe.
I guess for each of the past, do you have any lesson learned of what you know now about the research process that you didn't know during the process of doing your dissertation that you would want to convey to doctoral students starting out doing their dissertation? Like what do you know now that you didn't know a couple of years ago, if anything comes to mind?
I can start. I guess, like what you told me, Joe, be proud of what you are doing. Because when I was on the job market for the first time, when people constantly ask me why movie theaters, because the hottest technology should be AI or all the emerging technologies. But what I didn't realize at that time was that I can tell a very theoretically insightful story in a historical context. So I learned to be proud, and now I'm really okay when people call me the movie theater lady, because that's what.
Yeah, and don't forget Julie too.
Yeah, Julie, yeah, we are the movie experts here. Yeah, so thank you, Joe, for telling me that, and I would like to share that with others.
Thank you.
I think the biggest lesson that I learned was that no plan survives first contact with the data, but that planning is essential. Initially, I was hoping to find that startup patents were so much
was so much fun listening to all of it.
I wish I came invite you to a movie theater.
Oh yeah, I know. It was really good. It was really good. All your dissertations are so unique, and